Ninja Kamui episode 11 marked the end to a series of underwhelming episodes. However, it was riddled with problems, a far cry from the first episode, which was extremely well animated and boasted a high level of polish that disappeared shortly thereafter. What went wrong? Why did the fights turn into CGI fests? And why did the 2D animation quality drop? Well, let's try to answer those questions. Make sure to subscribe. I have covered the first 5 episodes before, so I'll mainly focus on the stuff that followed, but here's a brief introduction. The show is directed by Sang-Woo Park, one of the best action directors/animators in the industry. You might know him for the first season of Jujutsu Kaisen and the movie The God of High School, and Karo Vanishing Line for the 15 of you who've seen it. He is excellent. Remember his name, by the way. He'll come up a lot. The show was produced by ENH Productions, a studio Park founded, and as I had pointed out in my previous video about the show, this project had a glaring issue, one which is responsible for the gradual quality dip this show experienced. Ninja Kamui, the action anime, lacks action animators. It has next to no one working on it besides the 3D team and director Park himself. Ninja Kamui is essentially a test to see how many storyboard panels and keyframes this one man can draw. The answer, by the way, is a lot. He can draw an absurdly large amount of stuff, however, he can't draw enough, clearly. I don't mean to belittle the rest of the team, but there is a clear one-sidedness when it comes to the storyboard and animation departments. So far, Park has storyboarded 8 out of the 11 episodes, and he has been a key animator on all 11 of them. He wasn't credited for episode 3, but come on. And it's not like he drew a couple of frames and called it a day. He was a major component. He animated most of the action from episode 1, and he was one of the only 2 key animators involved with episode 5. And that's the problem. The team is too small. We did see a tiny handful of guest animators pop up, Satoshi Sakai and Kazunori Ozawa on episode 3 and Toshiyuki Sato on episode 11, but these were one-off appearances. No major action animator besides Park stuck around, and his output slowed down eventually. Meanwhile, the level of polish kept decreasing, as is customary with any modern anime. Long story short, Ninja Kamui went from being a spectacle of action animation to an average-looking show with above-average action storyboards. To get a better understanding of this dwindling quality, we'll go through the episodes. I'll pick up where I left off last time. Episodes 6 and 7 were largely unremarkable. They had a moderate level of polish and the action was predominantly 3D. The characters and the backgrounds. The CGI use isn't bad. In fact, I think it's decent. The choreography is great and the shots are dynamic, as you'd expect. I'm fairly sure this was always the plan. The models look too good to be a last-minute thing. However, it's difficult to translate Park's action storyboards into animation using CGI models. That classic roughness and intensity is, to a degree, lost when the dimensions change. Also, the models got old real quick. More about that later. Episode 8 was a dynamic one. Although the execution was far from perfect, there was a level of jank that was present throughout. The action was still largely 3D, and I was starting to get bored of it. Again, the CGI isn't bad, but it's not good enough to justify the amount of screen time it gets. The more you look at it, the more you start to notice the flaws. The rubber-like appearance, the formulaic movement, the occasional compression issues, you get the idea. It's not perfect, and the show gives you plenty of opportunities to notice the imperfections. Episode 9 looked rough, like proper rough. It successfully dethroned episode 4 and became the worst looking episode from the show. The drawings were extremely inconsistent. Nearly every frame was off model. It reminded me of Hell's Paradise. That's how rough it was. Even the choreography/storyboards were underwhelming, which is particularly unfortunate as this episode marked the episode directorial debut of Takayuki Sano. Episode 10 was better, but it still lacked polish. You could find plenty of wonky drawings. I think the schedule was catching up to them by that point. The animation director count was quite large. Regardless, the episode did feature a couple of short but decent cuts of animation. Guess who animated them? The episode was boarded by Park, so it did contain a few cool looking shots, including that classic first person shot. But again, When you have the same guy carry your production for 10 episodes straight, that guy starts to hit his limit. Even if said guy is Sanghu Park. His cuts from episode 5 were shorter than those from episode 1, and his cuts from episode 10 were shorter than the ones from episode 5. That is to be expected. I can't hate on the CGI near the end. Again, the problems were still there, but at the same time, it was cool, wasn't it? The choreography was so good. And that brings us to the most recent episode, episode 11. We were finally back. The mechs broke near the end of the previous episode. It was all 2D from here on out. What could possibly go wrong? Oh boy. This fight was mostly rotoscoped and it looked rough. So much so that I can't help but think this wasn't the original intention. Maybe they wanted to use motion capture tech like they did with God of High School, but they didn't have the time. The action looked extremely inconsistent. The motion was janky, the perspectives were screwed, the drawings kept melting, and the characters looked like different people depending on the frame. It was a mess. This was an example of rotoscopy gone wrong. Rotoscopy is a technique where you trace over live action footage, by the way. Just look at how stiff and inconsistent every bit of movement looks. Look how heavily the lines shift between frames. The choreography was there, but the execution was severely lacking. And then there was the motion blurring, which was obnoxious. Now normally I would have blamed the compositing team, but I don't know if I will this time around. Maybe the excessive blurring was just an effort to hide the janky everything. Also, they used this impact frame, which was bizarre. For those of you who don't know, it's from One Piece. It's drawn by Katsumi Ishizuka. It's not the exact frame, but it's the same thing. Why use it? The show also used Koki Fujimoto's impact frame from JJK0, but that was a movie Park directed. One Piece 934 had nothing to do with him. It's weird. Also, the use of the frame makes no sense. These square shapes are supposed to represent the cubic debris behind Zoro. This scene has no cubic debris. It literally makes no sense. Why use this? Anyway, the highlight was Toshiyuki Sato's sequence, and purely from an animation point of view, this was good. Far from Sato's best work, obviously, but still. He animated a whole minute worth of content, and some of it did look unfinished. This cut, for example, the drawings don't look particularly polished. The background animation here was impressive, but the compositing was awful. The texture work was really bad. If this was a 3D background, they could have added the texture directly onto the model, but since it's 2D, the photography team had to sync it up frame by frame, and it looks janky. The short black and white segment looked nice. Sato is good at that stuff. Later into the episode, we got a couple of Sanghu Park cuts. Both were short, around 5 seconds each, but they were fun to look at. This episode made me sad. It really did. The one-man army approach this show took clearly has its limits. Park can't be everywhere, and when he's not there animating the action himself, we get stuff like this. It's not a good look for a new studio. Will the final episode look good? Probably. I doubt it'll look as good as episode 1, but still. However, the path we took to get to that final episode was rough. That's about it. Liked the video? Check out this other bit of content on screen. Like and subscribe, and until next time.